want to thank everybody for coming out for the Next System teach-in today. My name is Ben Mansky. I'm a graduate student in sociology here. I also work with the Next System project and also with an organization you'll be hearing more about in a moment. Our next speaker is Timeka Drew. She is the National Director of the Liberty Tree Foundation for the Democratic Revolution. For the last several years, she has been leading, until her recent promotion to National Director, she's been leading the Global Climate Convergence, a campaign of the Liberty Tree Foundation and many others for climate democracy. She was the lead organizer of the People's Climate Convergence in New York City that was part of the People's Climate March. And I am very pleased to introduce to you an up-and-coming leader in the movement, not only for climate justice, but also climate democracy here in the United States, Timeka Drew.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank all of you for being here. Before I get started, I would like everybody to kind of move up to the front if we could. If you wouldn't mind too much, so we can have a little bit more of a discussion, because I'm not going to be just presenting at you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences. Thank you. And I hope to hear from you so that we can talk a little bit about what we think needs to happen to move from climate justice to climate democracy. And I'd like to start by saying, by lifting up the work and giving a big round of support and applause, if you would like to all the climate activists that have been putting their lives on the line and really, the climate successes that we have seen is why we're here at this moment, that we can even talk about a climate democracy movement, that we can talk about the people actually getting in there and being the ones to decide before the climate destruction starts. So let's give a little round of applause. Now, when I came to the climate justice movement personally, I didn't think I would ever be some kind of a climate activist. My background wasn't in climate activism. I considered that to be something somebody else was doing, something other people that didn't look like me, that didn't live in the same places that I lived, were taken care of. And I think that's a big misconception, and at least it's something that a lot of people feel when they hear about the climate justice movement. At the time that I was brought into the movement, was working a lot on racial justice and food justice in my own community of South Los Angeles, where I live and I raise my children. I'm a mother of 3. I have one 8-month-old who came with me today. And I was really passionate about the community garden movement. And I didn't really realize the connections between the climate movement and the food sovereignty movement. And so I thought, let those people worry about saving the whales and let those people worry about clean air and no recycling, and I'll worry about the things that are really happening in my community. But what I wasn't understanding was that I had to connect the dots. Why was the area in South LA that I was living in a food desert? The reason it's a food desert is because corporations have come in to the city of Los Angeles and they've done land grabs, and they've taken that land and they've decided to start doing oil extractions and fracking right in the city. And I was not aware of that, as a lot of people who live in Los Angeles are not aware of. A lot of people who live in South Central where I live in Leimert Park Arts District, they don't know that there's fracking happening a mile down the street, right next to their children's schools. One of the things that was a critique that I brought to the movement when I first joined the Global Climate Convergence and started organizing with them is I said, I don't know what fracking is really. And I think there's a lot of people, especially people that live by me, that don't know what fracking is either. And I was met by a lot of activists kind of saying, oh, well, Google it, figure it out. And of course I did. I mean, I was in the midst of doing all kinds of research because, like most of you know, there's an awful lot happening in the climate justice movement. Where do you want to focus? You want to start on oil trains? Do you want to talk about what's going on with the coal plants? Do we want to talk about all the toxic spilling that's happening into the water? There are, thousands of places to focus. So when I heard this response, figure it out, Google fracking, I knew that in my neighborhood, if I was trying to get people to buy into what I was working on, I certainly couldn't tell them to Google it. And then that kind of connects to another part of my story. So of course I Googled fracking and I figured out what it was, but then I sent my kids to a summer camp called Freedom School that summer. It was run by the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and as part of that program, it's a literacy program, but they also learn about activism. They learn how to be, it's kind of like a little incubator for activists. And they learned about fracking in their classes, and this is kindergarten through 8th grade. And my 3rd and 4th graders learned all about fracking, and they can tell you, yes, when fracking happens, it's when the corporations drill into the ground to extract the natural gas, but they put fresh water into the ground in order to do that. So not only are they wasting that fresh water, the waste products from extracting that natural gas go into that water, and it ends up contaminating our groundwater. And not only that, all of the burning and processing ends up contaminating the air. They can tell you that, and they didn't need to Google it, and it just took some activists being willing to make it plain for kids so that they could understand that they need to go into their communities and say, we're against fracking. When we grow up, we want to make sure no fracking is happening in these communities. They had a little protest, and they made signs, and they went to the different fracking facilities so they knew where they were. They spoke about why this is a problem for children in their communities. And so I know that we can do better than just Google it in this movement. And this movement is very intellectual. It's full of incredibly bright, brilliant minds. And I think sometimes we do get wrapped up in the data. And we don't realize that to grow this movement, we've got to get everybody involved. We've got to get people involved that don't know anything about what's going on right now. And we need to make them understand the urgency. And we have to open our minds and our hearts to be able to say, we're not dumbing down the movement when we do these things. We're not being anti-intellectualists when we do this. We're building a real democracy movement where we have people of color who feel comfortable coming to meetings, and they're not going to be talked down to and degraded because they've been busy in their little areas trying to figure out how to feed everybody. So we get back to my gardening passion. In Los Angeles, we have a community gardener named Ron Finley. How many of you guys have heard of Ron Finley? Some of you have, many of you haven't. So Ron Finley lives right down the street from me, a couple blocks away, and he decided to start growing community gardens in the breezeways. That's the land that is actually owned by the city. That's the strip of land between the sidewalk and the street. So he began growing food, copious amount of food. People started coming, taking the food for free. Food is free. Homeless people would come, families that needed extra food. And it became somewhat of a community garden. Well, the city started to fine him a lot, thousands and thousands of dollars, telling him he has to he has to get rid of the gardens. We cannot be growing food on public property. Well, people started to question that. Why can't we grow food on public property? The city owns it, and the people feel that we need more food, especially in a food desert like South Los Angeles, where in a 5-mile radius there is no grocery store to go to get organic food, forget it, fresh produce, period. So instead of just paying those fines and ripping up the garden, he fought. And because he fought, he won. And now the city of Los Angeles actually has an ordinance that we're allowed to grow food in our public spaces and in our breezeways. And that is probably seen by a lot of people as economic democracy. He was creating economic power in his community, right? And some people would say, no, actually, he's working on democratizing education because the people in that area are learning about growing their own food. Teach a man to fish, teach a man to farm, right? Then you're gonna be able to grow all the food you need. Some people might say, no, he was actually working for racial justice because this was happening in this area because this is people of color living here. That's why the area is blighted. That's why the grocery stores left. But I would argue that he is a climate democracy activist as well because he is taking that land and he is making it so that we can decide how we can use it. He's deciding that instead of the corporations coming in, we get to decide. So that is the kinds of things we need to start thinking about when we look at climate democracy and we think about climate democracy, when we look at climate activism and we think about climate justice. I really wanted to have some time to pick your brains as well about what you think about the climate justice movement and where we're going and how we can take some of the power that we've seen, the power that we saw during the People's Climate March, which I had a chance to help organize and be a part of, as well as, like I said earlier, a lot of the successes that we're seeing and a lot of the really scary loss of life that we're seeing globally due to climate activists, beginning to really have success in pushing back these corporations that didn't think that that was possible in the past. So I had these questions that I wrote on my little cheat sheet, and it's red telling me to stop running my mouth. We have 15 minutes left so we can talk. These questions are, how can we take the power of protest and move it into real power as a climate democracy movement? What are some concrete tools we can use to harness local power and challenge climate destruction in our communities? And what would it take for a larger, more global system of climate democracy that is actually coming from the people instead of corporations? What would it take for a global climate policy to be implemented? Now, some of the solutions that the Global Climate Convergence has been talking about that some people don't really look at as climate solutions are things like ordinances for TPP-free zones. Has anybody heard of TPP-free zones at all? A few of you have. I know you probably heard about the TPP. I'm not going to get into that, but one way we can kind of get around some of these toxic trade deals and some of these toxic things that the government might decide is good, we can in our local communities say, hey, we're not going to put up with that here. In this location, the TPP does not stand. This is a TPP-free zone. Something else that can happen is ranked choice voting in local elections. So people, alternatives like Jill Stein can have the right to be able to say, hey, I think Bernie's great, but I think Jill Stein would be good too, 1 and 2. So that we have national leaders that can be helping us form these policies. Community gardens, of course, as I said, and getting workers together who are all affected by climate destruction and striking. That's another way that we can come together. So I guess I'd like to open the floor now for you. You can ask me questions. You can also answer some of the questions that I've posed to you of what you think it's going to take for us to have this new global climate policy and what it takes to move from this power of protest that we've seen to a place where people really feel that they can take control when it comes to climate.
What's your opinion on how to move students or young people in general from a critique that's like personally centric, like replacing my light bulbs, to something that's more community focused or nationally or internationally focused?
That's a really great question, because so often with climate we do feel like it's just personal responsibility, and really my only answer to that is being willing to organize and get together and talk and have that people power. I think oftentimes our community, we talk about community, but how often are we really building community? We think of ourselves as individual actors that sometimes come together in a group and kind of listen, but actually aren't listening all that much. We're taking away what we want instead of really being committed to focusing. A big part of what I did when I first joined this movement was not really talk at all. I listened a lot and kind of really wanted to get an understanding of where people were in this movement. I personally was doing a lot of activism, kind of art and hip hop activism. I was throwing open mic nights and using that as a way to kind of be like, these are the people I hang out with, this is my community, how can we organize with each other? And so every week I'd get on the mic and I would talk about something that was happening in the community, and I'd invite community activists in to kind of talk in that way. So I think maybe oftentimes utilizing the things we like to do and kind of infusing them with the politics and the activism that's going to be what makes it so that we can survive in the future and keep having fun together is really a good way to approach things.
I've read Naomi Klein's book, and this changes everything, and I've gone to many, many lectures. Why doesn't anyone talk about the need for like global government in the sense that we have global climate, we have World Trade Organization, we have a global economic system, a global, climate, and on some level, unless we have a more of a global kind of approach, we're just moving around the pollution and we're moving around labor exploitation, environmental exploitation. Unless there's an international global approach, it seems like we can feel good about our little actions, but on some level, we're not actually transforming things.
Well, that's true. When in terms of climate, it's always important to look at things in two ways, I think, and that is a really great point. To look at it in terms of the global and international kind of philosophical way that we want to start looking at things, which is mainly stop allowing corporations to go around and do whatever they want to the highest bidder for profit, right? Clearly that needs to change. We're kind of taking steps with that, right? With the UN, we had COP21. Of course, that's non-binding agreement, doesn't really do a whole lot. So clearly, our global mindset definitely needs to be a lot more towards forcing things to happen. We can't really keep saying, oh, if you want to, United States, please stop, and we'll sign it and say we think that's a good idea, but then we won't do anything, and when we don't do anything, there's no repercussions for that. However, when it comes to climate as well, the local is incredibly important because there's just different things happening in different locations. It's impossible for somebody to understand, maybe what it is to be dealing with fracking in their community if there's no fracking in their community, but maybe they're dealing with oil trains, or maybe they're dealing with pipelines, or maybe they're dealing with coal. At first, I think when I first came into the movement, I very much was like, hey, why are we even talking about all these different local initiatives? Why don't we just start on this big, huge plan of this is what everybody needs to do? But because it's such a diverse world with so many different diverse climate, disasters, we have to also lift up the different local movements and the things that they need, because we don't even always know. We have to really listen to the locations and say, listen to what they need and how we can work together to help solve their specific problems.
I've been working in the area of climate over the last short period of time, and one of the things that I've really seen is really the power of soil. And the power of soil then turns around and leads to the power of food. And I've really been introduced to the concepts that Kimball Musk has been talking about recently, and how over the last few years he's opened up over 250 school gardens, because he's really bringing it right down to that education level, to the people level, and all of this. Part of it, of what, at least for me personally, has been, is to, having been a successful entrepreneur, is to turn around and look at how do I integrate my right livelihood so that basically everything I'm doing every day is part of a lifelong journey towards this next system that we're building. So I wanted to bring up those couple different factors because I think there's really an opportunity if somebody looks around at, as you said, what is your passion? What is it that you're really excited about? What are the areas of your competencies? And then turn around and look at, okay, where can I plug in so I can both earn a living and also make a difference in terms of what I'm doing? Your comments on
exactly.
that.
I very much agree. And it's so true about the gardens as well. Go ahead and share with the next person. But it is a really fantastic way because you're cleaning the soil as well as you're growing things and cleaning the air.
So I realize that, this is a question for you. So I realize that extreme capitalism and crony capitalism is what causes a lot of crises around the world. And so my question is to you is that, do you think it's a must to have a radical approach in having a consumer revolution for everyone? Like, like stop using our cars and, having moderate meat consumption and
Well, I definitely do believe the solution is radical. And I believe, so often we see it as an individual responsibility, and that is part of it for sure. But a lot of it is really just understanding that we can't continue in the system of profits like this. This is preposterous. And that really is what's causing all of this climate destruction more than anything. You know, there was this big movement, a media movement, really, to make it seem like it's our fault. It's the people's fault. You dirty people, stop littering, stop driving so much. And, you know, when we look at the military-industrial complex, in and of itself, the amount of fossil fuels and pollution and that is, you know, being caused just by our wars is, you know, what we're doing as personal individuals is so minuscule. When we look at the government responsibility and the corporate responsibility in terms of climate. That's really where the radical change needs to happen.
Hello. So I'm very fortunate to be taking a climate change class right now here at UCSB. And I love the idea of starting my own community garden, but my question to you is, how do you go about starting a garden? You know, and how do you look for people that will support your ideas, and how do you distribute the food based on what you have, and you know, how do you go about that? Thank you.
Well, you know, those are all great questions, and I will talk to you after about this as well if you would like. But one of the really awesome movements that is kind of sweeping the nation right now is this food is free movement. I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but it's kind of this plant food everywhere movement. And it's the thing that I was talking about in Los Angeles as far as the breezeway gardens. That's a great way to start. If there's an area that you can tend, if you can water it, and a lot of people are kind of around it, and you can get the ability to start it there. You know, if you have to ask somebody, that's one thing. And I would say ask if you have to ask somebody sometimes in certain areas. But certain areas that are public that you might be able to do it, you can start there and, you know, post a little sign that says food is free, take what you need when they're starting to grow. You know, there's a lot of resources online for starting community gardens if you wanted to have something where you have people come in and they sign up and kind of figuring out how to do all of those things. But I think a great place to start is front yards, shared yard space. I don't know how many of you are religious if you're a member of a church and their church lawn doesn't have any food growing on it. I think those are excellent spaces. If you aren't religious but you pass by a church, I think those are great places to ask, hey, I want to feed some people. Would you like to start a community garden? And I think that the more we can just start being creative and talking to each other and thinking, you know, when I first started my garden, I'm a member of a community garden and I have a garden in my backyard. And there were several things that I wanted to grow that did not come up for the first 2 or 3 years. You know, I would keep trying and they wouldn't grow. But then one day, all my plants would sprout of that particular strain that I was looking for, and now I have them. I've had them for 6, 7, 8 years. Sometimes you gotta just keep trying. And I only have a couple minutes left, so I can take one more question, I think.
In terms of your question about policy, something I think about a lot, and there's 2 things that came to mind. The first one is change.org. And I think with the power of the internet, and every time I go on there, I see this whole arsenal of petitions that are not only about climate, not only about animals, not only about rights, but about the whole spectrum of different problems we have overall. And it's so wonderful to see 100,000 people signing a petition, 200, 300,000. And I think collectively, the power of the people, we share a lot of the same common beliefs. It's just not very obvious yet. But the internet is really making that very obvious with change.org. And an idea would be even to make an official voting app. Imagine if every citizen in the United States had an app on their smartphone that during, between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. there's open polling. All the nation voted for those 3 hours. Imagine how quickly bills could be passed, how important issues like climate and animal rights and justice would come right up to the surface. It says 80% of Americans believe that fossil fuels should go out. And one day we can make that whole opinion very, very public with these kind of electronic e-voting systems.
It's so true. Thank you so much for that comment. In terms of technology, definitely, there is no reason why we shouldn't be participating more. And I think it is up to this next generation to create those tools that we're going to be using. And just as a last comment, I'll say, and that comment helped me think about this, when we think about what we're passionate about and we have our silos, we want to kind of think about convergence more and supporting things that don't seem like they're connected to what we're working on, because generally they are. If we're part of this next system and we're pushing for this next system to happen, we need to be willing sometimes to go outside of our comfort zone and say, hey, I am going to learn a little bit more about that racial justice policy or that education policy or that climate policy that I don't understand, because that might be something that's affecting me more than I think it is. Thank you very much.